So the Tory approach to Brexit's going well. One of the slight hiccups, to say the least, is the issue of the north of Ireland, of the peace process, of what it will mean if we end up with a so-called hard Brexit, of exiting, for example, a customs union with the European Union. Now, I want to talk about some of these issues with the new leader of Sinn Fein, Mary Lou McDonald. She's actually here in London, partly to talk about Brexit, which is all we'll be talking about for years to come. But I also want to talk to her about equal marriage, about LGBT rights, and about the future, not just of Ireland, but of Britain as well. You've been leader now of Sinn Fein since Feb. Not much in the in-tray, quite a quiet time in politics for both sides.
Right.
Let's start with the biggie, Brexit, which is going very well. To what extent do you think the Tories' approach to Brexit is a threat to the peace process?
Hugely so. The European project has been problematic now for a very, very long time. I could recite the list of how the project has fallen down and how it needs to be radically changed as well as anybody else. When I say that Brexit is a disaster, I'm not saying it from the perspective of somebody who thinks that everything is fine and dandy and that the status quo must prevail. When the Tories came up with this brainwave, it was not to emancipate the working classes. It was not to vindicate the working man or woman. It was not to create a more open, free, democratic society for younger people. It is all about consolidating power. When people in the north of Ireland, though, went out to vote, they voted against Brexit. And I think lots and lots of them, like me, said, right, what we have is not perfect. We certainly want a big change to the status quo. But Brexit and the Good Friday Agreement, the peace that we've built so painstakingly, they're mutually incompatible. The entirety of the peace process and the Good Friday Agreement was premised on the basis that we were all in the European Union together. So there were no borders. So there were no differences in terms of trade and customs and tariffs. So there were no differences in terms of service provision in the main. And then along comes Brexit and pulls the rug from under all of that. I get why a lot of people came out and said, well, you know what, Europe is a mess and a disaster. We're not pushing back on that, but we are saying that Ireland is different. And at a minimum, even if Britain wishes to exit the single market and the customs union, you impose that in Ireland and you cause us a whole pile of trouble.
So when we talk about trouble, what that spells, if Britain exits, there's no customs union with the European Union, which is what, of course, the Tory Brexiteers want. What will that mean for the peace process?
We have a whole series of north to south bodies that are bedded in. And currently people move freely, back and forth. And I mean, they go to work, to school, to hospital, to socialise, freely across the border. So to all intents and purposes, there is no border for the purposes of everyday living. You impose a customs regime and tariffs, all of that changes because that has to be policed, that has to be monitored, that has to be enforced. It disrupts life. When we landed on the Good Friday Agreement, we landed at a position that said we have been through, centuries of trouble and turmoil, but decades of open fighting on the streets between the forces of the British state and the forces of Republicans. We resolved together to actually move away from that and say there's a democratic way to mediate this and to resolve it. There's no appetite for a return to conflict, just to say that to you at all. But you'd be very foolish, wouldn't you be very stupid to play games with that? Wouldn't that be very reckless? People like Boris Johnson. Last time I visited here, I was coming over to see the Prime Minister, and I hear reports that Boris Johnson is saying, well, forget about the Good Friday Agreement, it's done. And I say to myself, what planet does he live on?
It's an interesting question, which I don't have an answer for. But in terms of Boris Johnson, our esteemed Foreign Secretary, he says this whole stuff about Northern Ireland, the border, is nonsense. We could end up with a border, like between Camden and Westminster. What do you say to that?
Well, the most polite thing that I can say is that he's wrong.
You can be impolite if you like as
well. We can all have our opinions. The fact is that the European Union is a set of treaties and laws and regulations and a big complex body of things which apply now uniformly as we speak across our islands. And Brexit means that you disrupt, you throw all of that up in the air. To suggest that that somehow is a detail is just ridiculous. This is what Boris Johnson is proposing. Ireland inside the EU and outside the EU. service provision to be run according to two sets of regulations and standards, agriculture to operate according to two entirely different regimes, and. I won't go through all of it, but I'm making my point, I hope. You disrupt the political geography of the island. You say to people in that way, well, you know, whatever about the Good Friday Agreement, we have decided, in that imperious way, we decided that we are leaving, and by the way, we're making you leave with us. That's not the way to win friends and influence people. It's certainly not the way to bed down and to consolidate a peaceful, constructive relationship. So I have to tell you, I'm kind of almost at my wit's end to try and rationally engage with the non-answers that are emanating from the British system, and not just from Boris Johnson. I mean, Theresa May tells us that whatever Boris Johnson says does not represent British government policy. So let's take her on her word. But what's even officially coming from Britain is just stuff that is knowingly unworkable. So what does that say then? Does that say that this is a game? Are they playing a game of chicken with Brexit and with Ireland? And we've said time and time again, we will not be the collateral damage for the Tory Brexit.
Brexit's a bit of an opportunity for Sinn Fein, isn't it? Because it throws open the question of Northern Ireland and its relationship both to Ireland and Britain.
The question of Irish unity is now being discussed again across the political spectrum in a way that I don't recall before. So that's a good thing. But I think what we need is an all-of-society discussion. And I think the atmosphere that can be best facilitated is in one of relative stability and calm, not with the chaotic Brexit. However, if the British government stick to this position and are insistent on crashing the north of Ireland out of the European Union against the people's will, well then I think obviously the issue of a referendum comes onto the table in that context. But I want to emphasise it's not the ideal scenario by any stretch.
The Tories lost the majority of the election. Whoops.
Yeah. Were you heartbroken?
I was devastated.
How much did you cry?
I wept for weeks on end.
I thought that, yeah.
Anyway, but now they are relying on the DUP. To what extent does that mean the British government is not an honest broker?
That supply and confidence arrangement with the DUP is toxic, and it has robbed any pretence even of being an honest broker. Worse than that, the DUP have signed on lock, stock and barrel to Theresa May, and they've said, look, whatever you want to do on Brexit, we're good with it. Even though they have to know that it's absolutely against the interests of people and the livelihoods of people in the north. And the other part of this Faustian pact is that by return, Theresa May looks the other way and pretends she doesn't see the fact that our LGBT citizens in the north of Ireland can marry who they love. Irish language speakers don't enjoy the same language rights as in Wales and in Scotland, that women on the island of Ireland are denied access to healthcare and abortion services that they require. It's a source of astonishment to me, and I mean this genuinely, that any democratic system would stand over that, to me, is astonishing. And yet, Mrs May has allowed the DUP to hide under her wing, to take refuge in Westminster, to run away from the real Brexit debate which is happening at home. The good news is that for lots of people, that is something that has brought people out onto the streets in huge numbers. So those campaigns are building. They're not green issues. They're not orange issues. They're people issues. They're human being issues. They're society issues. They're decency issues. I take heart from the fact that you are seeing now that sense, that common sense of what people are entitled to. And I think that's a really, really good thing.
A united Ireland. Mm-hmm. Will it happen in your lifetime, do you think?
Yes.
It will. Oh, blimey, very confident. How? What's the timescale? And why should people in Britain support a united Ireland?
Well, let me start with that. Why should people? I'm really, really conscious that we have a huge Irish community in Britain. Like, there isn't a family in Ireland that doesn't have connections with Britain and family here. So we have real ties of kinship and friendship and family, you know, island to island. Everybody understands that we need to be not just good neighbours. I think we can be really good friends. I think that we can support each other. But the only way that we can do that is to allow Ireland to accept that Ireland, a small island, is best governed, more efficiently governed, more democratically governed when we take decisions for ourselves. It's not, the proposition of Irish unity isn't an act of hostility or an expression of hostility. You know, we can look after ourselves. We know what's good for us. We can take something that was broken, two reactionary states, North and South, since the 1920s, and with the energy of social change and progress, and with generational change, that we can actually fashion something new and inclusive. And I would believe that can be a world leader in terms of the force of international justice issues and so on. And some people might say, oh my God, I sound like John Lennon, who I love, that this is like just a dream. It's not a dream. We can do this. Of course we can do this. Politics is about challenging and changing. And when the time comes, we're going to need a big conversation about a new Ireland. And I would hope and I would anticipate that people in Britain, the good people of Britain, would support us in that, would see the common sense in it, would see the opportunity in it, because I think once we get to that point, then you're really normalising and equalising our relationships. And as I said, I think we can be good neighbours and very good friends.
So that was really interesting. It certainly raises quite a lot of questions about the whole Tory approach to Brexit. I want to hear your thoughts on a united Ireland. Do you support it? That would probably polarise opinion, I would imagine, but we want debate, so leave your comments as ever. I also want to hear your ideas about anyone else we should interview, always up for that. We've got loads of interviews, videos that we've already got posted up, so do click on them, and we've got many more to come. As ever, subscribe, and I will see you next time.